Okay. So Kathy Wilson is our speaker today. She has worked for New Day for Children since inception in 2009. I sent out in our email a picture with a grad who said she got the tattoo for New Day.
I think so.
The tattoo on her, it's a New Day logo.
It was our old logo. It's the one that's on the pins still.
Yeah.
Little girl in a swing.
Because New Day saved her life. Prior to New Day, Kathy taught elementary and middle school. My wife teaches or did teach elementary school. You know, something common. She's married to Paul and has 3 grown sons. A native of California, she has also lived in Washington, Chicago, and Alaska. Kathy is passionate about helping the fight on the problem of child sex trafficking and help to restore victims. So let's give a welcome to Kathy Wilson.
Thank you. So I don't need to hold a mic.
No.
Okay.
Don't pick you up.
All righty. Well, it's great to be with you all. Thank you for having me. I was raised for the most part down here in San Jose, so I always love any excuse to come back. We're in Oakland now. Went to MIDI for 1 year at Valley Christian, graduated from Valley Christian. When it was still up in Saratoga, we were the only school that got snow days at that time. But now they're a huge campus on a hilltop in South San Jose. Yeah. So New Day for Children, in a nutshell, we exist to rehabilitate American children who have been sold commercially for sex in this country. So I always feel a little bad at a lunch, you know, if anybody loses their appetite, if you don't know a lot about this topic, although Rotarians tend to know more than most people because you've taken this on as one of your causes, human trafficking. But still, most people are not aware to the extent it's happening right in their own backyards. So I'm sorry to let you know that this is a rampant problem in Santa Clara County. We've cared for kids who have been from here, sold commercially for sex, and we have cared for kids who've grown up elsewhere but been brought here to be trafficked. So you need to understand this as a global phenomenon. It's there's a resurgence in, well, it's called the modern day slave trade, and it's never been easier to buy, sell, or transport people for commercial purposes than it is today. People aren't only sold for sex. It's broken down into categories: child soldiers, forced soldiers, that's one type of slavery; forced marriage, which ends up being kind of an indentured servant experience. Trafficking happens. So you can have people working in fields, but at the end of the day, rather than going home, getting a paycheck, they're locked in a barracks with armed guards. That happens in this country. And this is just all becoming very fluid, difficult to fight. Law enforcement they're knocking themselves silly, trying to eradicate this, but there is no real way of eradicating or stopping this problem because it comes down to a condition of the human heart. And we as individuals have the ability and the power to use our creativity, our intelligence, our resources, our power for good or evil in this world. And unfortunately, greed, sex, money, very primal human emotions, there's a lot of money to be made off of exploiting other human beings. And sadly, the state of the world is such that there is a lot of money to be made off of selling kids for sex. And so there are people that have been their consciences have been so seared and hardened that when they look at a child, rather than seeing a darling little human that we need to protect their innocence and cherish, they see dollar signs. And so the bad news that we all have to wrap our minds around is what is really going on in this country. We're still calling this phenomenon prostitution. And so meanwhile, the big sea change is the age. So the average entry age in the United States of America for entering the life of prostitution, of being sold for sex. Always before was older teens, early 20-somethings, pretty static, and also more a phenomenon of cities, more of an urban issue. So this is now coast to coast, rural areas, small towns. It's every ethnicity, it's every socioeconomic level. Anyone and everyone can come into your home via the way that we're having, this wonderful meeting right now. So the internet is a blessing and a wonderful tool, and it also has changed everything. And it's a Pandora's box. So our kids are on these things. Our kids have these in their pockets. They take them to school. I'm constantly telling parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, please advocate that children do not have cell phones. Get them a flip phone. They can text, they can call, you can be in contact with them. Kids, elementary kids, middle school kids do not need access to the power that this represents. They're playing with fire. They're being actively stalked and targeted on their social media, on their apps. The lines are getting blurred for everyone. And so the age now, the average entry age for girls is middle school to start being sold for sex commercially. It's even younger for boys being trafficked. We for the past 12 years, we've cared for girls. We've had over 100 girls now in our care. And the average stay residentially for a girl is 15 months. So we look out for quality programs that are residential for sexually trafficked children. And those are who we partner with. So we now have partnerships in Louisiana, Texas, Florida, Colorado, and here in California. There was a great one in Oregon and it closed down, sadly. We're always on the outlook for new places to partner with. Most of the programs that we can place kids in and help to fund them and keep them in, most of them have been in existence for just about 4 years. So that's a wonderful thing, and that shows progress in our country, because when we first started, there was hardly anything in this country, residential long-term therapeutic care for these children. So, these kids, their trauma levels, their PTSD, the trauma levels are sky high. We have cared for children who have been raped thousands of times. So we're just woefully behind as a country in doing anything meaningful to address what's going on in the lives of our children. Drop-in centers, a lot of efforts are wonderful, tutoring, being done to help them. But when it comes down to it, if they're still in a situation that made them vulnerable to be preyed upon like this in the first place, many of our kids have been trafficked by gangs. Many of them, it's been familial. So, Band-Aid solutions aren't cutting it. And so what we see sadly happening, these are called America's throwaway children. And when a person is broken down in their psyche and personality to be prostituted, to be sold for sex, that person loses themselves. And there's brainwashing that takes place. There's labeling. No one's ever going to want you. This is all you're good for. You're a piece of trash. And so these tapes get in a person's mind, and it's very, very difficult to get out. And so when people get inducted into this life, they tend to stay in it. And often they simply disappear. Many of these kids, their lives end in suicide. It's, what can you do to a person short of killing them that harms them in a more fundamental way than to take someone and make them a product, a commodity, and sell them the most intimate personal gift that we have to share with another human being, our sexuality, the core of who we are as humans, that instead that becomes a commodity. And so there's so much taken. And these kids need Rotarians. They need they need their communities to be the adults in the room and say, this just is not okay, that this is now the state of affairs in the United States of America, that 12 and 13 is the average entry age for a girl to be prostituted, to be sold for sex. Younger for boys, it looks differently with the boys, 8 to 11. And the boys, the common thing is for them to be used in pornographic films, and then for that to go online and passed around groups of men. And in the case of the boys, it looks different. You have some men with real power and prestige and money and positions in the community. So think like an Epstein situation. And there has been a conspiracy of silence when it comes to boys in the country. And men, you know, for so long, it hasn't been okay for men to share their feelings. And so the message we're giving our little boys is, if you're raped, you're kidnapped, you're made to be in pornographic movies, big deal, man up. We're giving them that message by our inaction and by our silence, that they don't matter, their trauma doesn't matter. And you know, I met one of these boys in prison. We've had inmates who've done remarkable things for us behind bars over the years, made jewelry, sold pizzas, done frozen yogurt sales, advocated for trafficked children at risk of their own lives, which really does show, you know, the power of redemption, and that people can change, the human heart can change. Some of these guys have been real leaders and have really addressed the root cause of networks and gangs in the communities to get a shift to happen. And so one of these prisons, inmates have raised almost $50,000 for us over the years, which I think is remarkable given that the very little amount that they make, you know, with their work, and that they charge for buying things. And so one of the prisons, I went and spoke at their chapel service to hundreds of guys. And if you ever would have told me, you know, that I would be going to prisons, because I had a fear issue growing up. I knew several people personally that were murdered, and just never would have imagined that my life would have taken me there. But these guys had a big check to present to us. And afterward, one of the guards said, one of our guys would like to talk to you. Are you comfortable talking one-on-one? And I said, sure. So we went over into a corner. It was a young Latino. He was about 21. And we talked for a good 20 minutes. And we were both, by the end of it, crying, holding hands, and just, he shared with me how his mother had sold him from the age of 3 to support her drug habit for sex. And so here's one of these trafficked boys, a throwaway, America's throwaway child. And I said, you know, I'm so privileged that you would share your story with me, and how many people have you been able to talk to in your life about this? And he said, you're the third. He said, it's only been in the past couple months. I thought I had 2 true friends in this prison. And so I told them what my life has been. And he said, they've been there for me. They've had my back. And when you were sharing the story about the girls in the chapel service, one of my friends was behind me. He put his hand on my shoulder and whispered in my ear, does this just sound like everything you've experienced, which your whole life has been? And he said, you know, after hearing you talk about these kids getting out of it and being healed, I feel like I have a purpose when I get out of this jail. I would like to help do something for the boys that this has happened to, like me. I've been there, and it doesn't have to define them, and it doesn't have to define me. And that's one of the main messages we give to our kids, that this is something that happened to you, but this does not define you for the rest of your life. There is hope. And so the average length of stay with us in one of our programs is 15 months. But we've had kids who've been with us for 4 years. The one little gal's story in our newsletter, she lives in Napa. We put her pseudonym May in that article. She wrote a thank you letter. She has her first apartment. She has a terminal illness. And so we're walking with her till the end of her life. And she's been on our orbit now, almost going on 10 years. So if they still have need of care from us after post-program, when they graduate, we'll walk with them. We're there for them. This is a healing journey they're on. And just like victims of classic sexual abuse, they're not done when they graduate from one of our programs. You circle back, throughout your life to be healed of this kind of trauma. But we offer them everything we can. We get them on track educationally. We take them to horse camp. We work with therapists who specialize in trauma of victims of sexual abuse. And so we get them medical care. We've had kids with AIDS we've cared for, girls who've been pregnant. One of their lovely perpetrators jammed a screwdriver into their ear. So, broken jaws. There's a lot of brutality that can be part of this. Not always, but that is a common thing. So sometimes people will say, how can you call this modern day slavery? Most of these kids that we've cared for are living at home with their families. So people will say, well, they're not locked up. They're not chained up. They could talk to their parents. They could go to a teacher, to a police officer. Well, there's often threats and coercion and violence that's a part. Even if someone takes a Romeo approach, a boyfriend approach, whining and dining these kids, it usually develops into kind of a domestic violence scenario where it's a flower one day and a slap, the next. And so that happens, and sometimes extreme violence. We've cared for kids who have been locked in containers. We had one little girl locked in a storage unit in San Diego. Our first child, California foster girl, walking to school when she was 10 years old, and that was a classic kidnapping, and she was taken to Mexico and sold to a female brothel owner in Mexico. And so that kind of busts some stereotypes, because a lot of people think trafficked kids are all brought into our country from other places. In this country, most of the children, most people involved in sex trafficking in America are homegrown. Labor trafficking, it is mostly foreign nationals. But sex trafficking, it's mostly domestic. It's our own kids that are being preyed upon. And so that child was taken to Mexico, and her seller, her torturer, because this child was one of the most just unspeakable things that happened to her, was a woman. So even though most of the buyers of people for sex are men, I never want people to get the idea that this is a bad male versus virtuous female situation. First, we know now that boys are trafficked also. Little boys are sold just as our little girls. So we have to stop framing this as a victimization of women and children. It's boys and girls. I have one pamphlet there of our program in Florida. That's the first one in the country, Caring for Boys. If anybody wants that pamphlet, you're welcome to have it. Most of the purchasers of people for sex are male, but many of the sellers and recruiters and people raking in money off the bodies of these kids are women. So it's, it takes all of us to address this. Women shouldn't be the main people fighting against it, speaking against it. I'm thankful we now have our CEO of New Day, our nonprofit, is a man, is Phil. He used to work for all the Paneras in the South Bay here. So we've got a great guy at the helm just since January. And that's really going to bump us up to a different level too. Everyone except for our executive director, Sharon, who is a professional violinist. So we have a real interesting, talented group of people that are working and fighting against this. We're all part-time, including myself. But now we have a full-time COO who's a business guy. And so I'm just thrilled to see where that's going to take us. Because COVID caused us to think outside the box. So we did have other partnerships outside of California prior to COVID, but only a couple. And now we're realizing this is not, place determined. We're just looking for the best programs all over the United States where we, can have a place to care for these children. So having Phil as our COO is going to help us immensely. I thought I set my timer, but maybe I didn't. Yes, so I was going to say let's do Q&A now. Yeah.
The women that are involved in the trafficking, are they typically previously women that were? Are they typically women that were previously abused themselves,
Okay.
or not so much?
Good question. One of our children was sold by her mother. She lived home with her mom and grandmother. Grandmother sold her daughter. So that was a familial generational thing. Our partner in Louisiana, most of the kids who've come through the doors of that program, about 80 of them now, have been trafficked by family members. So in that setting, interesting in Louisiana, it's been mostly familial. I have a lot more sympathy, if someone grew up and their mom and their older sister were prostitutes, their uncle was a pimp, if this was modeled and glorified and that's normative, and that young guy, grows up and does this in his life, I have sympathy for a person like that, because his life circumstances, he was victimized himself, And so, yes, there are people who are prostituted who then turn and prostitute others. And sometimes that's a survival thing. If it's a classic pimp setup, there tends to be one woman, one female who kind of is under him like a corporal. She's called the bottom, and she's, in charge of recruiting and bossing other people. She'll be the punisher. So she can be involved in, extreme criminal activity herself, but she herself is also victimized. So it does happen that way. I have zero sympathy. I heard you're doing something out in Blackhawk. We for many years did all of our fall dinners, our annual dinner at Blackhawk, our birthday parties out there. And there was a little ring that was busted up in that area. The whole Danville, San Ramon area was in the papers a few years back. Wealthy people living in Blackhawk, financing their lifestyles, have other means of making incomes, have other income stream, but they're selling children to finance their lifestyle. Zero sympathy for people like that. And so there are some females like that.
It's not sympathy, it's understanding the person that the victim that then victims someone else.
Yes.
You're not sympathetic for them, you understand their.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
yes.
We don't want to have sympathy for anybody that's doing
You don't want to excuse it. It doesn't excuse it, but yes, there's some context to it.
So that's interesting to me, because I always hear sex trafficking is coming up from the South, and the cartels are doing it. Yes. And all this. So mostly it's not that way. It's more like, I am gonna sell my daughter off because that's just what I'm gonna do to make money.
It's all of it. It's all of it. Sometimes, and so I always don't like it when it's presented as one thing.
Yeah.
And often you'll hear it always presented as a pimp model, always using violence. So sometimes I use my hand as a graphic. If this is what they call guerrilla pimping, kidnapping, torturing, we've had kids who've seen other kids killed in front of them to punish them for getting out of line. Okay, that's what's guerrilla pimping. Then my pinky would be self-trafficking. And so this is on the increase, sadly. And again, with our technology, we have kind of perfect storm conditions in our culture. A lot of cultural things feeding into this. Okay, what was the great big song? The singers. WAP. Yeah. Wet ass. Okay. Wet ass pussy is the name of that song, and it's about a brothel, and that's who President Biden interviewed, was the singer of that song, which elevated her. Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. Oh, yeah. It glorifies, it's glorifying it, and so the lines are becoming so blurred for everybody. If this is glorified. During COVID, what did our media do? Presented this online platform for women, OnlyFans,
always positive spins on it. Oh, isn't this great? This is female empowerment. These women, this is how they're making a lifestyle during COVID. They're skipping the middleman. They don't need a pimp. It's female empowerment. So when these messages are going out culturally, our videos, our movies, docudramas, painting this in a positive light, our teenagers and kids are getting sucked in. And, you know, the role that porn plays and all that. So worldwide, globally, it's estimated the average age boys are starting to view porn is 8. And for girls, it's not far behind. And so this is also feeding into it because so much of porn, there's so much violence. And, you know, the levels keep going up. So we have, as a culture, as people, as human beings, to ask ourselves, okay, just because we can do things, should we? And how can we pull back? What are we doing, you know, because we're free to do it and we can, at what cost? And we have to have these conversations in non-shaming ways also, because people, their sex addiction is a huge problem. And it all feeds into this, because how did it get to be the case that in this country, most of the men, okay, it's not a group of criminals that are buying kids for sex. It's firefighters, it's teachers, it's pastors, it's bankers, it's lawyers, it's all kinds of people. So the politicians, so the lines have been so blurred. And we really have to get it out of the shadows, because they rely on our silence and our ignorance. They rely on the yuck factor, you know, to keep doing this, but we can do better. And so we can fight it, and that's what New Day's doing.
So that's what I'm happy that you brought that up, because I was going to ask you, like, how disgusted are you with the OnlyFans like site? Because that's literally, and I know someone that is on there making a lot of money. And
Yes.
It's like literally like that's disgusting.
Yes.
I asked a lot of questions. I'll ask so you can answer that. And then, so how much of that I'm going to traffic Jerry? I'm going to bring him down to Mexico because he doesn't speak Spanish. So he has a language barrier and a cultural barrier. So I'm going to traffic kids that don't know the language. I'll bring them down there. And
Yes.
maybe not even down there. Maybe to the Middle East. Who knows where they go? Right?
Maybe right here.
Well,
We're
maybe-
caring for a little girl right now. We have hired a tutor to teach her in English because she's being sold right here and she doesn't speak English.
So what's her native tongue?
Spanish.
Okay, yeah. 'Cause
Yeah.
I mean, you think that would be like.
Yes.
I was wondering if, what is it that New Day does? Is it a school? Is it a?
So we take these kids, we find they're residential, so like little boarding school kind of setup. So it's like a therapeutic boarding school for children who have been sold commercially for sex. And so our kids, I really want this to come across. It's not just their caregivers and their therapists and their teachers and people like me, you know, ancillary staff doing it. Our kids, our girls, the kids we've cared for, and now the boys, they are some of my heroes. We now have 2 of our graduates on our staff. We've had a 3rd. They have other jobs. One of them, she's just amazing, young gal in her 20s, is now married, has children. And she came with me to Louisiana to meet with the girls there and talked with them, shared her story. You know, look at me. I never would have, 8 years ago, never could have imagined myself being, you know, in this situation now. Because the average age of girl that we work with is 14, typically when she comes. The youngest girl who was given to us was 11. But these kids, see, whether they're from, okay, we've had Jewish girls, Muslim, we've had 2 pastors' daughters that we've cared for. One of our kids, daughter of 2 UC professors. So again, high and low, all over the map when it comes to, you know, socioeconomic, everything. But what they all have in common is they were all victimized and sold for sex. And so they know, and they can talk at night and cry with each other and hold each other. And one of the powerful things I remember was we were doing a high school graduation for one of our girls. She was from Colorado. Her mom and aunt drove out from Colorado to be there. We did a big celebration. She wanted a pink cap and gown.
guests came from the community. It was wonderful. We had 2 new girls who'd only been there 2 weeks. What's the message they're getting? We're not having to tell them at all. They're seeing it. Okay, I'm fresh out of this. I'm angry, I'm confused, I'm ambivalent. But here she is, and she's graduating high school and she's going to college. So right there's such power in that. There's power in the kids seeing other girls who've been and other boys who've been in the situation, going on with life, going back home, getting back in high school, going to college, going into job training programs. So that just shows the need for long-term residential care for these kids, and they're worth it. We could do this program for a fraction of the cost overseas. Initially, we were looking at doing this in Cambodia or India, and we had a lot of people in social services and law enforcement say, please do it here, because hardly anything is being done for American children, and these families are being left to flounder on their own, with very little help. Yes.
Yes. What is happening in terms of cracking down on the sex trafficking here in America from a federal level, from a state level, and from a local level?
So much is being done. So the FBI is just doing a fantastic job trying to ferret this out. They do nationwide sweeps. That's been publicized. So when we first started, my first task was just getting people to suspend their disbelief 12 years ago, because it wasn't in the media. But now these things have been publicized. The bust of law enforcement, breaking up of the cartels and the gangs that are doing this. So laws have changed. The penalties have changed. It was completely worth it to pimps and to perpetrators to do this, because they're raking in money hand over fist. You can become a millionaire selling children for sex. And so they were getting slap on the wrist pimping sentences, pandering. So now these laws have been changed. They're being, coming under trafficking and kidnapping, much stiffer penalties. One of our girls from guys for that happened twice. So then I get the phone call from this mom, and she's crying and screaming on the phone saying they're out there right now. And my 16-year-old, her big brother, has boarded up the whole house with plywood to try to protect his little sister. This girl was 13 years old. We met her in a grocery store parking lot in Alameda, and we had an armed transport agent with us. And an armed juvenile transport agent. Juvenile transport agents they're like law enforcement. They can take kids places. Okay. And so we had him with us in case these guys followed, because they were armed and dangerous. And this mom, her little girl, she got in bed in her pajamas early in the morning. And so the girl is just, all fuzzy. Why am I here at the grocery store with mom? They get out of the car. Mom says, honey, get in the van with these people right now. They're going to keep you safe. And just bawling and crying in the parking lot, holding on to each other. And the little girl's like, Mom, I don't want to go. I don't want to go with them. I don't know them. She said, I can't keep you safe. You have to go with them right now. So that's how we got our second girl. And that child, after she'd been with us for about 9 months, was a different girl. She was on track educationally. She gotten healthy. She lost a lot of weight. She learned to swim. And she said, I want to put them away. And so we don't make our kids or even encourage them necessarily to go to trial, because it's a very grueling experience and they're really victimized. But her perpetrator got a 20-year to life sentence. And the DA of Alameda County, Nancy O'Malley, said that sentence was heard across the country, because we're not playing anymore, with these people selling kids. So we've made a lot of progress on from the legal standpoint, from the penalty standpoint. Also, the police departments have all been thoroughly trained now. I'd say probably in the whole country. When we first started, I spoke out in the Central Valley in Ripon, a little Dutch town, farming town. You ain't Dutch, you ain't much. And the whole town was there with the flags. The police officers were there. We're in the school, packed house. But the police officer got up and first thing he said was, now I want you all to know, we don't have anything like this happening here in Ripon, not in our town. And so I wasn't going to argue with him, but afterward I went up to the police officers and said, you know, I'm so sorry, but many of our kids have been sold right here, right over there, because you have this thing called a freeway with motels. And that's the typical thing. They pack 3 kids in a van. They go from motel to motel. Just when somebody thinks something strange is going on in those 2 rooms on the 4th floor, they whisk them in the van and they're gone. Next time I came to Ripon, 3 years later, same crowd, same police officers. This time they said, we want you all to know this is happening here in Ripon and this is what we're doing about it. And they had articles that they brought themselves of the busts that they'd made of trafficking rings. So all of the police officers now in the country and the hotel workers, the airline workers are getting training in this all the time in how to detect first responders. So we've made a lot of progress, not nearly enough. It's not okay that kids in the United States of America are being average entry age of being sold, prostituted is middle school and elementary school. That is not okay.
I just have one
Okay,
question.
why don't we get some questions from Zoom, because it's almost late, so you already asked 2. Do we have any questions from
What is the
Zoom?
dollar amount? What does the child cost?
It's about $42,000 a year.
No,
average.
I'm saying if I were to go buy a child.
You were to buy a child?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's perspective. Like,
Residential brothel in Oakland, they have some residential brothels completely hidden going by. You would never know. It's women and kids locked in those. $30 for 15
so I'm
minutes.
saying if I want to buy a kid, like what's human life cost?
Oh, you mean just to buy them?
Yeah, it's
Not to have, not to have.
It's gross.
Okay, so that sex act is $30 for 15 minutes in that residential brothel. That's a price point that anybody can afford.
Yeah.
Boy, buying a child, human life, it's going so cheap.
Okay, yeah.
You can get a child for thousands of dollars. And in around the world, people are selling their kids to survive in third world countries, and people are buying them. So, yeah.
Okay, is there any questions from Zoom? Zoom's still live?
No, but I'm very sad.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay,
Actually, I do have one question. What is the one thing that you need the most? Like, you need so many things to make this go away, but if we were to try to do something in our limited capacity, what is it that you need the most?
Oh, you guys could do a pancake breakfast for us. I need you anytime I speak any place. Okay, I always visualize it like dropping a stone in a pond and then the ripples going out. You guys are the ripples. You all have spheres of influence that I don't have, that our staff doesn't have. So first of all, shout this from the rooftops. Open your mouths and share it with everybody you know. Take some of our brochures. We'll send you bundles. We need people to be advocates who know that this is going on. We need people to, first of all, if you're not aware, you don't know there's anything to respond to. So Rotarians are already doing that. I guess take the banner, take the cause that Rotary has already championed and really run with it, in whatever way that takes you. But do something, take a step. You can send us a check. That's always welcome. If not us, somebody else. But, take that next step and the next step. Educate yourselves, read a book, because it has to go to the top of our list because these are our children. And we are to protect and safeguard our children and the children in our community. So, yeah, let it not be the topic of the day. Take it and run with it.
all right, thank you very much. All right, that's a great meeting. The 10th, we do have another speaker, Frank Jewett got him. He's ex-Bush, President Bush policy guy or cabinet member or something. Bush, I can't even remember his name. But anyway, read the grapevine and you'll find out. Goodbye.